Welcome to Off the Shelf. I'm your host, Yvonne Wolf. Today, our special guest is Jacqueline Saper, the author of her memoir, From Miniskirt to Hijab. Jacqueline, nice to have you.
I'm delighted to be here.
So let's talk about your book. What inspired you to write?
Well, we constantly hear in the news about Iran, and many Americans really don't know much about the country or its people.
I understand that it's the 40th anniversary this year
Yes.
for the revolution.
Right.
So
It's the revolution, Iranian Revolution happened in 1979, and this year's 2019 is the 40th anniversary. So living through the Iranian Revolution, I felt compelled to write about my story because I was a witness to it. And I believe that I have something valuable to share. It's a unique story, and it's a historical event that needs to be known.
and from a perspective of someone who grew up in that era, the most formidable years.
Right. I was 17, 18 years old when the revolution happened. So I came of age in Iran, in pre-revolutionary Iran, when it was very much Western. It was like a
When
being
women
in-
were driving and women doctors were...
Yeah, as my book says, it's from miniskirts to hijab, because I
Yes.
wore miniskirts. I went to school dances. I traveled abroad. I watched American movies.
You could talk to boys.
Yes, yes. I went to a co-ed school, high school. It was very much like living in the, Europe or America, very Western.
Yes. Now, your family was Jewish, so you were
Yes.
not...
Yes, my family was
Muslim,
Jewish. Iran is predominantly Muslim,
Yes.
and they are Shiite Muslims. And about maybe 2% of the population are all other religious minorities.
I see.
And the Jewish community is very small but very ancient. It's been there for over 2,500 years.
And it was working very well together?
It was a wonderful era. It was an egalitarian society, an idyllic time of, we call it the golden era,
Yeah.
because nobody cared what religion you were. Everybody was friendly. In our neighborhood, we had all types of religions. There were Zoroastrians, who are ancient Persians.
Yes.
There are Jews, Christians, and Baha'is, and obviously Muslims. And we all
That sounds
lived
like-
very comfortably.
Yeah, that sounds like Lebanon.
Yes, it was very nice.
And your story is so interesting because you say you stay in Iran after the revolution. So
Right. I was in the revolution and chaos began latter part of 1978. And it ended when the Ayatollah came back on February 1st, 1979. For about 8-9 months, it was absolute anarchy, disarray, chaos, and I lived through it. There were tanks and bullets in the streets. And all foreigners were evacuating. Many people left, but I remained. I stayed for 8 years after, and I lived in the Islamic Republic of Iran because the name of the country changed.
yes.
So-
And how did it affect your life? Did you go to school again, or how was
well,
that all
I
suspended?
finished high school, and I got married. I was married in Iran during those 8 years. I had 2 children there. It was the most tumultuous years of the
Yes.
new revolution because the new regime wanted to get established. New laws were imposed, new
Right.
constitution, and many new restrictions.
So the laws could now be against you, or
Well, what happened was religion and state became one,
yes.
and the country was ruled by clerics. So religious laws prevailed. For example, there was an emphasis on segregation of the genders. Schools became either girl or
Single
boy
sex,
school, single
yeah.
sex. Women were, since the revolution, have to wear the hijab.
Yes.
That's why my title is that. It's mandatory. So as a Jewish, Iranian Jewish teenager, I was forced to dress as an Orthodox Muslim woman.
Yes, even
It's
though it has
tough.
nothing to do with your
Nothing
religion.
to do with me,
Okay.
but yeah.
So at that time, was it all right to marry outside of your religion, or is your husband?
My husband's Jewish. Actually, in Iran, Muslim women are not allowed to marry outside their faith.
Right.
That's
That's typical, but you were not affected by that.
No, I was not affected by that.
Yeah. So let's talk about that photo of you. You in the front. You look very much like yourself. I am very impressed with how well you can defy the laws of aging. But you look wonderful.
Thank you. The publishers, Potomac Books of the University of Nebraska Press, and traditional publishing takes a long time.
Yes.
They have a book cover department.
Do they?
Yes, and it was absolutely out of my control. Actually, I was worried. I was thinking, what are they going to put on the cover? Yes. And they chose this photo of me at the age of 17.
Wow.
And I'm in the balcony of my parents' home in Tehran.
Oh, it's a very appealing cover because it makes you want to know about this young lady. So let's talk about your life during the time of the Shah.
Well, during the time, Iran was ruled before the revolution by a king. Mm-hmm. His name was Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. He was known as the Shah. Yes. Shah means king. And it was, as I said, he was very progressive. The country was very modern. But it was a one-man rule. There wasn't any political diversity.
Right.
And people were yearning for more civil rights. That's one cause of the uprising. His opponents were mainly the clerics. He had many opponents, but there was a cleric by the name of Ayatollah Khomeini who opposed his rapid modernization. And Khomeini was exiled in 1964 after an uprising. And he, from his exile in Iraq, which is a neighboring country to Iran, and later from France, he led the revolution. And finally, January 16 of 1979, the king, the Shah, left Iran. And with his departure, 2,500 years of monarchy ended in Iran.
Yes.
So, and
well, that sounds very much
like China.
Like
China?
Yes.
Very
because
big
it's a very
event.
long time.
Very long time, yes.
And this is the era of change.
Big change. And the Ayatollah Khomeini, Ayatollah means it's a rank in Shia Islam.
It's a title.
A title,
yes.
A hierarchy.
Yes.
And he returned February 1st of 1979, and basically that's when everything changed, the new regime came upon.
Yes. Yeah. I like how you help us understand that history in such a short time.
Yes.
I lived through some of it, but I would never express so well.
Right. Well, because the revolution dramatically changed the stability and the structure of the Middle East.
Yes.
And even today we're seeing the results of that.
It's a strategic location
yes,
for the
very
Middle
strategic,
East.
Because north of Iran is the Caspian Sea,
yes.
and to the south is the Persian Gulf,
right.
which we keep on hearing in the news about the Strait of Hormuz. This narrow strait, about 20% of daily supply of oil passes through it.
Right.
So it's very important.
And I have other friends who are Persians, or they prefer to be called Persians, and they left during that time.
Yes.
They also talk about, I guess, the educated or intellectual class is the first to leave.
Exactly. Iran has had a tremendous brain drain, and actually the Iranian American community here are the very successful, highly educated sector of society. The
yes.
very successful business people or educated professors.
Right, and that might in itself create a cultural misunderstanding when Americans here try to understand Iran, and they say, well, people I know who are Persian or Iranian, they're nothing like that. So,
well, Iran has almost 83 million people. So it's very diverse and big. So when you say an Iranian,
yes.
It can be many people. Different cities have there are a lot of ethnicities in Iran.
Yes. So what would you recommend to other writers? I mean, this is a lot to organize, right? You talk about
yes.
the many ethnicities and how do you represent all that in one book? So what would you?
Well, I would advise writers to write about what they know, what you're passionate about, and what you really can talk and explain about. This was my life. I know very well about Iran, but I still had to do a lot of research to make sure all the dates I am mentioning are correct.
Factual, right? And
Absolutely. And my publisher, I mean, before they accepted the manuscript, it went through a rigorous review. 13 people reviewed it and read it. But even after that, they hired an Iranian scholar to read the manuscript just to validate all the dates, the events, even the locations in the book.
right? Because it's
Yes.
hard to know when they've been,
Right.
let's say, renamed or reorganized.
Yeah, especially after the revolution, the street names were
Been
all
renamed.
renamed.
Yes,
Yeah, because
exactly. I
before they were
understand.
named for Iranian kings or even U.S. presidents, and afterwards it became very different names.
So it's almost like a rewriting of history, because if
Yes.
the Iranian kings were ruling for over 2,000 years,
Yes.
renaming those streets confused people.
Very much so. And after the revolution, I had to be careful. You know, when you hailed a taxi, you had to mention the correct new name.
right?
Yes.
Oh, that
Yeah.
sounds so much
But
like
many
China.
of the names were the principles of the revolution, like
Yes.
Revolutionary Street, Freedom
Yes,
Street.
Liberation Street.
Li-
This is where
exactly.
we see in
Yes.
China. Every
Yes.
big city has a Liberation Street.
Exactly, that's
So,
it.
wow. And now, where else have you published your work?
Well, currently I'm a columnist. I write op-ed articles, and I have written they're published regularly in national and international newspapers. I've been published in the Jerusalem Post, the Seattle Times, the Forward, Aish, American Heritage. It's a long list, the Persian Heritage. I'm trying to think of this.
Oh, that's-
And I've been featured in Yehudith Aharonot. It's an Israeli newspaper. I've been
Yes.
featured in that.
That's quite an accomplishment.
Thank you.
For your first book, yeah. And I understand that there's a lot of Jewish writing groups that would be.
Possibly, yeah, but this
Interested.
book is beyond a Jewish book. It's a human rights book. It's a women's issues book, religious minorities book. It talks about the themes are Islam, the despotic regimes, war, because Iran was engaged in a brutal war with Iraq,
Yes.
which I lived. It lasted 8 years, and I lived 7 years of it. I was in Iran. It lasted from 1980 to 1988.
What made you finally to leave? Was it with your own family or with your
I
husband?
left with my husband and 2 children, but it was a difficult way to leave because at that time they had put restrictions. It wasn't a law, but there was an untold restrictions on travel for the Jewish minority. So I was not able to gain a passport. How I left, it's the last
need
chapter
to-
of the book. You need to
yes.
read the book.
And how do you leave? Were you able to stay in contact with your family after you left?
Yes, yes. You can contact Iran easily. Actually, today, you don't have to be in a country to know about a country. On my smartphone, I have 2 apps. I can watch Iranian state-run TV. I can, with all that, you can talk to people. You can
So
you
that is
actually
not
can know
restricted.
more because you're not. There's so much censorship over there.
True. And when you say you left Iran with your family, with your children,
Yes.
were you mainly, the reason you left, was it mainly for your children?
Absolutely. And because my children most probably would not have had a future there. They were subject to discrimination, and especially my daughter as a girl. It would have been, she was 6 years old, and as part of her school uniform, she went to first grade there. She had to wear the hijab as well. And, she had, it was hard. We lived in the southern part of the country at that time. I grew up in Tehran, which is the capital
city, yes.
But then after I married, I went about to the south of the country. And it's very hot over there, hot climate. And she had rashes on her neck. And she was being indoctrinated into radical ideology. That was hard for us. So we
Even
couldn't-
though she's not.
No, well, she
Muslim.
went to a public school,
I see.
and it was part of the curriculum. That time there was such anti-American
Sentiments, yes.
very much so, and the kids were learning "Death to America" slogans, and it was hard for us to take that.
Jacqueline, your book is very interesting, and I've seen some work on LinkedIn, your activities on LinkedIn
Yes.
for marketing the book. Can you tell us about how you started with that, or would you recommend that to our writers?
Yes, actually, marking the book is the most important part. Writing it is very difficult, publishing is another challenge, but marketing it, people have to know such a book exists.
Yes.
I am currently doing interviews such as this. I'll be on television on November 4th about the hostage crisis. I will. I have a lot of book signings. I have about 14 book signings this month. It just explodes, and I will be going to Minnesota in May. It's exciting.
Are
very
these
exciting.
been arranged by your publisher?
Not so much. Mostly it's word of mouth. People hear about it. The publisher obviously has a long catalog and they do their own publishing. That's the benefit of going to a traditional publisher. But so far, it's been me. I haven't, but the publisher will be helping me.
And marketing on LinkedIn, was this something that you were advised about, or were you just...
The publisher advised me to do social media marketing.
I see.
And it's incredible because LinkedIn, Facebook, you put on a post and it's shared so many times and it reaches so many people.
And how do you enjoy the contact with people when they respond?
It's really exciting. It's brought me to meet a lot of new people, a lot of new places. It's changed my life in a way.
Yes,
It's very exciting to meet new people.
And keep you busy, doesn't
And keep
it?
me busy, and it's made me learn more myself. I research more. I go more in depth, and I've become a Iran subject matter expert.
Very nice, very nice. That's amazing to hear about. And let's see, about the writing of your book, did you feel that you're getting feedback from people who have read it already, or not yet? Reviewers?
The people are getting, actually the book is officially released on October 1st, but it has been available for the past few weeks. So the rankings are pretty high on Amazon. But from October 1st, that's just yesterday, people are starting to write their reviews.
So Jacqueline, we talked about the organization of your book. We talked about the context, the history of that time. Is your book organized chronologically or is it thematically?
No, it's organized chronologically, but it's in 5 parts. Part 1 is hope, which talks about the time of pre-revolution, when we had so much hope for the future and our prosperous nation. Part 2 is fear, that's the time when the revolution was happening.
Yes.
Part 3 is adapt. That's when we had to adapt to the new surroundings. Part 4 is veil, which is a metaphor for the new restrictions imposed on our lives. And part 5 is resolve, and that's how we finally left Iran.
You found the inner peace, perhaps?
Yes, yes.
So what do you think is most important for people to know about Iran?
Well, Iran I believe, it's my homeland. It's a beautiful country. It has 4 seasons. It's all kind of geographies in that country. It has as I mentioned, 2 seas to the north and the south. The people and the people in their culture, they're hospitable people. They are good people. They have a rich culture. As I said, Iran was never colonized. It's not a new country founded after the First World War. It has a 2,500-year rich history.
Yes, if not more than that.
Even more.
Right.
It's if you go into the culture and the people and the cuisine, Persian cuisine, I would recommend you to try it out.
I have. Yes,
And
I have
Persian
very much,
cinema,
yeah.
Iranian cinema is very much nowadays, it's won Oscar, Iranian movies. I just wanted to mention that Iran was named Persia until 1935. So it's used interchangeably. Some Iranians say we're Persian because they are of Persian ethnicity.
Yes, that's what I understand.
And
it as.
Iranian, one more thing to know about Iran, Iran is not an Arab nation. They are, as I said, they're Persians. So they speak Farsi, which is Persian. They do
Yes.
not speak Arabic.
Yes. Okay. Yes. That's very good to know, and especially, thank you for letting us know what year it actually changed its name because.
Yes, in 1935 from Persia it became Iran, and in 1979 it became from Iran it became Islamic Republic of Iran.
Yes. Because I know Persians who want to be called Persians instead of Iranian because of the 1970s change.
Yes.
They feel that they are not that.
Right.
The Islamic
Yes.
group, so they want to distinguish that they are
Yes.
Persians instead.
And we hear Persian. We hear Persian rugs, Persian cats,
Yes.
Persian golf. It's the name is still there.
Mm-hmm. Well, Jacqueline, so let's talk about how we know each other. Now, we know each other for years.
It goes back a long time.
Yes, from our Glenview Toastmaster
Yes,
Club.
Glenview is a very special place for me because, as you mentioned, how many years ago is that?
Oh goodness, that's
a long
I would
time.
say almost 10 years. And
Wow.
I know you as a very good speaker.
Thank you.
And you were very passionate about like understanding, cross-cultural understanding.
Yes.
And I feel that it's such an asset to us as a
Thank
Toastmaster
you.
Club, the North
Well,
Suburban
I learned a lot in
Toastmaster Club.
Toastmasters. It was my first experience in public speaking, and I met wonderful people such as you.
And then when you told me you're starting to write a book, and we
Yes.
just kept in touch until I said, well, let me know when it's going to be
Right.
released.
Yes.
And here we are.
Actually, currently I'm working on a second book.
Tell us about
And
that.
my second book is, writing a book is a long process.
Sure is.
It takes a few years.
Uh-huh.
My second book is about, my father's Iranian and my mom's British. So I have that bicultural upbringing. And my second book will be about the time frame between 1946, which is right after post-World War II,
Yes.
until 1961, which is where my second book begins. So that is an era that I will concentrate on Iranian and British history.
Oh, my
How
goodness.
both cultures. It's based on the true story of my parents, but instead of a memoir, which is my first book and is all absolutely nonfiction true, the second one I'll play with it a little bit and I'll write a novel.
Yes.
So the
That sounds
second
very
book,
interesting.
it's going to be the British and Iranian history during that time, and I will concentrate on the 1950s when there was a big turmoil in Iran, when there was a popular prime minister who was overthrown. So that's part of the book.
Well, that sounds like a lot of research.
A lot of research, yes. But it's done with passion and love.
Yes.
So I enjoy doing
It
it.
is a very interesting time because people don't really think about
Right.
the history of a country is more than just a few years. We have to look back
Yes.
into more like a century at a time.
Yes, and the Middle East in general is a very important region of the world. We should know more about it. There's always something's going on over there. There's always, unfortunately, a lot of civil uprising, a lot of wars going on.
Yes. Last year, my son did a presentation, a research paper on the Lawrence of Arabia, and with
Yes.
him, I read so much about
learned
the
a lot.
Middle East, and I feel like we all need to learn something
Right.
about the Middle East. The
Yes.
beginning, even more so than to understand what's happening now.
Exactly.
Because-
History is very important.
Right. Sometimes we only look at, okay, what happened since the Ayatollah, but then 1940s is when all these, say, the chess pieces were set up to
Right.
face each other.
For many Americans, they know of Iran from the hostage crisis.
Yes.
That occurred in 1979. But
I'm glad
Iran,
you-
Iran has a much richer history before hostage crisis.
Yes.
A lot happened before that.
Yes, and before the animosity.
Actually, before the revolution, Iran and the United States had very close relations.
Let's talk about that, the American hostage crisis.
Yeah, hostage crisis occurred in November. Actually, this November, it's going to be 40 years.
Oh my.
But the
I
revolution.
remember the televised.
Yes, and they made a movie out of it, Argo,
Yes.
which won an Oscar.
That's true.
The revolution happened in February of 1979. So by November, the revolution had been established for 8-9 months.
Just after the whole chaos that you described.
Right, but it was still a very revolutionary era. Everybody was excited.
Fervor.
Very
Right.
much so, and anti-American sentiments was high. They, unfortunately, it's a unfortunate event when radical students and angry mobs went up the gates of the American embassy, which I had passed many times. It was a very big compound, about 25 acres. They went up the gates and seized the embassy, and eventually they held 52 American diplomats hostage for 444 days. It's a
Yes.
year. And
Yes.
so
Over a year, yes.
the movie Argo talks about 6 of those American service workers who escaped from the back door, and they hid in the Canadian embassies until they got out. And it's a true
And
story.
What do you think of the movie? Do you think it's well represented?
I
or
liked
do
it.
you-
It was, in the movie
It has
was
to be entertaining too.
it was entertaining. It was exciting, but you should remember it's a Hollywood movie.
Yes.
I was in Iran at that time. I watched this TV. It's an entertaining movie explaining a historical fact, but it should not be mistaken as a historical fact.
Yes.
Because some parts of it were embellished. For example, the last scene, how they got out of the airport.
Yes.
It really didn't happen that way.
They have to make it faster. I think that sometimes
Thrilling.
movies,
But
right?
overall,
the ending,
overall, it did depict the sentiment of what was going on,
yes, the tension.
the tension, and they did a really good job of showing Tehran of that era. Even down to the taxi drivers, and the Iranian taxis were orange color.
Yes.
They had that.
Yeah.
The traffic is always difficult.
Loud and
It's
noisy,
loud
right?
and noisy, and no specific order.
Right.
It was right there, very well done.
That's a nice. Those are the sentiments that sometimes we recall instantly when we see a scene set
Right.
up.
Even the posters in the streets,
Yes.
how the streets were arranged, very, very accurate.
Well, thank you, Jacqueline, for coming on our program.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
And thank you for watching. Join us next time on Off the Shelf.